Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Fabrice Soudart, and I'm the Managing Director of Global Equality at Out Leadership. Today is my pleasure to welcome you on a session that is going to focus on the boardroom. As you may know, it's kind of a new topic for Out on Equal. We haven't talked a lot about LGBTQ representation in the boardroom, but in fact, it does become a very important topic in the United States. And so it is my great pleasure today to welcome the best expert on the topic. First, I will go to Matt first, who is the Senior Advisor of Out Leadership on Quorum. In fact, he has been by the side of Out Leadership for the past 5 years as we develop this conversation on LGBTQ representation in the boardroom. He himself is a board member on a number of boards, I think most of them in the life science industry, but he's extremely passionate about improving representation of LGBTQ plus people in the boardroom. And so it's a great pleasure to have him with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt.
Thanks, Fabrice. It's really terrific to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. As you mentioned, I work primarily in the life sciences industry.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. And then we have Christy Smith. Christy Smith is a Senior Managing Director at Accenture, but she's also a board member. She's also a board member in the nonprofit sector too. And actually, Christy, we might talk a little bit about whether there are any bridges between the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector. So thank you so much for joining us, Christy.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks.
And then, of course, we have Denise Torres. Denise Torres is our go-to person when we talk about LGBTQ plus board member. She had most of her career in the consumer goods industry and pharmaceutical. She actually was a senior professional at Johnson & Johnson, but now she's a corporate board member on actually a huge number of boards. And we will get to talk about this position. So thank you so much for joining us, Denise.
My pleasure. Thank you, Fabrice. And it's great to be here with all of you.
And to keep this conversation lively, I will take any question that there is in the chat, and we'll field it to the innocent speakers. So don't hesitate to type questions, even if they are extremely difficult. I will be delighted to share them with this group, and they are not very shy, so I'm not too concerned about them feeling offended by any question. So I think I have to give a little bit of background to the conversation on LGBTQ plus board representation before we start asking our panelists questions. And so if you allow me, I would say that, I happen to co-lead with Matt Quorum, which is the LGBTQ plus initiative for improving board representation. And then the other part of my work is to foster the role of the private sector on global social change. So I have to tell you that at the beginning, I didn't pay any attention to the Quorum part of my job. And every time, Matt would send me an email, I would ignore it and not respond. And then it kind of picked up because first, one of our member companies, Goldman Sachs, very famously said, we won't bring any companies to IPO if they don't have diverse board members. And in fact, they mentioned sexual orientation and gender identity explicitly, which was to some extent a first. And then on the heel of that development, the California legislature proposed a bill that would mandate diverse board representation for companies headquartered in California. And then again, they said, that one of those board members should be a woman and the other one should represent a minority, including, someone is asking if closed caption is turned on. I suspect it's because of my terrible accent. And so maybe I'll try to articulate a little more. But I think we can actually put closed caption. But I also can improve a little bit my English. So, I don't know if we can do that, but I will try. So after that, the California legislature passed this bill called AB 979, and that was considered a huge development. And then similarly, a few months later, the NASDAQ sent a proposal to the Security Exchange Commission saying that they would like to only list companies that have diverse board members, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And then finally, the Congress passed a bill called HR 1187 on governance that would mandate for companies to disclose the sexual orientation and gender identity of the board members, of their board members. And we don't know if it will pass Senate, probably not, because politics have been a little bit polarized in the United States, in case you have not noticed. But that's a huge development because it shows that the regulator cares about LGBTQ plus board representation. So that's kind of the background of this conversation. What we believe is that it might be a turning point on LGBTQ representation in the boardroom. And so after this background, I'm going to stop talking so much, and I'm going to let the English speaker take over. So Christy, the first question goes to you. You have been extremely visible in the corporate diversity discussion through your current role at Accenture and your prior role leading diversity and inclusion at Apple. So do you believe that this is a bit of a turning point when it comes to LGBTQ representation in the boardroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an enormous turning point, and I think it's an incredible opportunity for both private and public boards to have diversity around the table, have diversity of perspective, have expertise sitting at the table to help them advance their goals and govern the organizations that they're responsible for. So I do think we're at a turning point. I think we've been at a turning point for the last several years as it pertains to women, to people of color, and now the LGBTQ community. So I'm delighted with the shift. And I still think there's much work to be done. I still think, despite all of the legal actions and mandates that are out there, that there's still not enough representation in the boardrooms, by far not enough. Some of the same excuses that have been used in a corporate setting, as if we can't find them, they're not enough. All of that have trickled up to the boardroom, and I truly believe those are excuses. And so I think that having forums like this, educating our community around the need to prepare and develop to be a corporate board member is incredibly important.
And Christy, I was a bit vague about which board you serve on, but I know you are on a non-profit in the sports industry.
Yeah.
But you are also on a for-profit board, right?
That's correct. I sit on Endo International's board, another life sciences company, Matt and Denise. I'm in good company with them. But I also sit on the board of the U.S. Olympic Committee's field hockey team.
And do you believe that it's important for people like you to talk about what is your experience as a lesbian on a corporate board, but also to be visible as a lesbian corporate board member so that more LGBTQ plus people think about board service?
Well, I think the way that I approached my service on boards and board seats is very much the way I did in my employment, which is the contract that I have with my employment, the contract that I have with the board is to come in, be prepared, and do my job to the best of my ability and show up to do that job. My being gay is secondary to that, in my view. Now, do I speak very openly about my wife and my kids and what's going on in my life? Absolutely. I think it's important for me. I'm way too old, and I have a lot less patience than I did when I was younger to bother with, pronouns or anything like that. And I understand that that's a privilege that I have. But, I choose my boards as much as my boards choose me. And I choose to go there and very open about who I am. But the job that I have is to do my job with excellence.
No, and I agree. And I think, it's also key to see that to have, visible, sorry about that, I should have turned it off, but to have visible lesbian, say, look, I am doing board service, I am actually a contributor on the board, and
frankly, it's good for the company. It's good for the company as well. And that's why, I think Endo is seen as a progressive company in this regard. And the other boards that I am in consideration of, I think are seeking out diverse individuals to be on that board to show that they are progressive and they're putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Well, thank you so much, Christy. So Denise, I'm going to turn to you. And actually, when we were in the green room, the virtual green room, you were talking about the fact that it remains difficult for LGBTQ plus people to reach the senior managerial position that are basically the ramp towards board service. So your personal experience is that you actually got to the top of business. But could you explain to us what is that link between getting at the top of the corporation and getting into the board? And also, what do you think are the bottlenecks to LGBTQ plus people getting in the position that have chief in their titles that will then basically lead them to board service?
Sure. If anyone's had a chance to read the latest Lean In McKinsey survey, we see that if we look at women, we're making progress through the pandemic. It's a little bit unstable though, because of things like burnout. When we look at that, the broken rung, as it's called, that if we look at when we come into an organization and we move through different levels of management, we fall off, and that's particularly true around women of color, and it's true for the LGBTQ community. And you say, well, gosh, why is that? And there's a lot of reasons for it, right? Is it skill? We know that's the one thing it's not. But, in my experience and kind of as you figure out this whole, career landscape and working in companies, I think there's a couple of things that really drive what we would term success, but success in terms of title and money and all of that. And there's definitely skill. You got to work hard. The other part is connections. And, and that's a fact. And people say, I don't want to play the game. I don't want to do this. But the reality is it's the game of life, because these connections and how people make decisions, it's true whether you're in the PTA, wherever you're at. And so one of the challenges, and it's a big challenge in moving through our careers, is to get that sponsorship. And, sponsorship is different than mentorship. We could have a lot of mentors and they give us good advice and they give insight, but the sponsor actually opens the door or opens the window and brings us through. And I have found that to be the case, certainly in my career, that I call them career angels, the people that made a huge difference, not only in my career, but ultimately my life, because they gave me these opportunities and, helped me progress in different ways. The board is the same, getting to a board position, there's many, many similarities, because ultimately people make choices, and the other board members make choices. The CEO makes choices, the chair of the board, and you're never going to get chosen if people don't know who you are. So first is how do people find out about us? That's a whole topic. And then secondly, how do we get chosen, and how do we build that trust? Now, I'm saying all this like the onus is on us, and the reality is it's also, and it needs to be, on people doing the selection and the choosing. But the long and short to the answer is, what's the problem and what's the solution? It's connection.
I love it. And, it's such a straightforward answer. And in fact, I would love to talk a little more about the bottlenecks to networking for LGBTQ plus people. One of the things that you kind of observe is that, the straight white guys are in the PGA board, and sometimes LGBT people are not there. And so the question is, how do you do that networking if you're a bit on the margin of that organization? But before we discuss that, one question I had for you, Denise, is that, Matt and I manage a database of board-ready candidates. And so from time to time, we use platforms like this one to tell people, well, if you are interested in board service, please raise your hand. And what we see is that a lot of the white gay guys tend to raise their hand, but the lesbians or the people of color, very often think that's not for me. And so my question to you, Denise, is, have you ever felt that imposter syndrome of, well, this is too much for me. I'm already lucky I made it to the top of business. I shouldn't even try to go for, a big company board or something like that.
Yes, I think really anyone with a little bit of humility, is impacted by the imposter syndrome. And, the imposter syndrome simply is, can I do it, right? Or people going to find out. And the boardroom is exactly the same, because we start comparing ourselves to others in a way as if everyone is the perfect candidate. And that, we look at, the 7 people on the board and we assume they're financial expert, they're clinical expert, they're, regulatory expert, they're an R&D, and they're not. And so we start comparing ourselves to something that doesn't even exist. And so have I felt that way? Oh, sure. I've had moments where, especially when we're in clinical discussion, I'm also, in the healthcare area, and I'm on some oncology boards. I don't know what the hell they're talking about from a clinical standpoint. I write things down and I look them up. But even though I don't have that knowledge, I have lots of other knowledge. And I think probably the Denise from 10, 15 years ago, that would have, just scared the hell out of me. And today I'm like, oh, I got a couple of things I have to, I want to look up, knowing I will never, ever, ever even come close to being an expert in that area. And I just don't beat myself up about that, because I know the truth. The truth is we're all bringing different things, and that's why they want me. And that's why they want this person next to me. That it takes all of us. For the person that knows all the clinical, I know a lot of, operational things and culture things. And so I think that's why great boards work. But sure, we go into anything. If we're not afraid, we're not growing. If we don't have that pain, we're not growing. If we were so calm and so I got this, either we're incredibly naive, and out of touch. But, I tell myself now, when I feel anxious or I don't know this, I think, well, hey, you're growing, girl. That's a good thing.
So going back to what you said about networking, and I don't want to caricature, but a lot of time LGBTQ plus people vacation in Provincetown when their straight peers vacation in Martha's Vineyard, and we might not play golf. Also, I think, Matt, you play golf, and I do play golf, but very poorly. And we are not on the board of the PGA. We might be on other boards. So how do you network when you're not really part of the club, right? You're a little bit on the margin of the club. How do you bridge this gap between you and where the regular board member hang out?
Yes, I don't think it's a matter, and I think this is true also for women. I don't think it's a matter of being somewhere, golfing, doing whatever. We have a daughter with cerebral palsy, so I don't have a lot of flexibility. I'm going to go jet set to whatever, do this. So I use what I have, and one of the things that we all have is the ability to help others succeed. So I have no problem. I take a lot of calls. Hey, Denise, would you mind doing this? Or would you like to meet this person? I say yes. I'm a big fan. If someone reaches out to me, and if they're not trying to sell me something, and they say, hey, can you meet with me? Can you do this? Yeah, because it leads to something else. Plus it makes life fun. But I think what I've always used is if I could help someone today, I'm telling you, that leads to so many roads of connection. The other thing is, and this is sometimes things happen that you can't explain why. The career angel that comes along, the recruiter that just seems to get you. And you know what you do with those people? You love them up, man. You tell them how appreciative you are, and feeling that from the heart. The people that have been my sponsors, I will never, ever, ever forget about them. Every Thanksgiving, I sit down and I write them a note, or I send them some kind of gift certificate. Is it something that, I don't have to do that, but I want to do that. And sometimes I think we forget that when people help us, the, the thing of genuine appreciation, because they want to help you again. And I don't know, that gift of giving, at least for me, has been something that has, just totally exploded into opportunities, and that connection you get on one board. And especially, this is true in so many boards. I waited for a couple of years, no phone calls. I got one call and I went. It was a Fortune like 200 company, and I go to the interview, and it's a bunch of like older white men, and I did not fit in. They were asking me questions about my husband, about all this, and I thought, oh shit, I don't want to do this. And so I went away for a year and a half. I wasn't, pursuing things, and I had a recruiter call me out of the blue. She watched some videos that I had online. We totally hit it off, and on the basis of that one call and meeting several people, I was on 5 boards in 6 months, and turned down I don't know how many after that. And so the difference one person can make, and they connect you to someone else, who connects you to someone else, who connects you to someone else.
Well, that's fascinating. And I have to say, first of all, that I'm paying attention to the question in the chat, and I promise we are going to get to them. But what I love, Dennis, is that there is almost a spiritual message in what you say, which is that if you do love interacting with other people,
Yes.
if you find some joy in learning more from other people, and if you actually help people and be grateful for the people that help you, that's actually what networking is about.
Yes, and like just truly believing that you have something to bring. And it's interesting. I don't know if anyone's had a chance, and I would just recommend everyone, if you have an interest in this, why do we choose people? And we choose people on the basis of trust. And there's a woman at Harvard, and she's written a lot of different things. Her name is Frances. I don't know if it's Frey or Fry, but she did a TED talk, and she calls this thing the trust triangle. And the 3 things on the trust triangle are empathy, being authentic, and the third one's being logical. The authentic one I had to learn about, because when I first started, I thought, oh shit, I gotta show up a certain way, and I have to do whatever. And I spent so much time trying to fit in, and not being this person that I am, female, Hispanic, lesbian, a 6th grade sense of humor, right? And that, when I started just bringing that, and not putting so much energy into trying to be, saying the right thing, and not having my Chicago accent, and not doing whatever it took, I don't think I was very interesting. And, now I think everybody watches TV. Everybody's, probably has some pet story from, as you can see, my Violet walking around here, but, there's a humanness to all of us. And if we can express our own humanness and kind of, have a connection with others, I'm just not a good bullshitter. I'm not. And so, in terms of talking, I would say, yes, absolutely. But in terms of, being this polished schmoozer, that's never been me. It's not going to be me. And will I be for everyone? No, but that's okay too. And so I know when someone said, how do you break in? Sometimes there's a knock at your door. Sometimes there's a little crack in the window, and don't be afraid to go through that. The first board, I have to tell you that, it was very competitive. It was Bluebird Bio, and, it's kind of sought after position. And man, when I got the chance to like go in that interview, I worked it, man. I worked it. And the CEO, I said to the CEO, Nick, I said something about mojo. And he goes, what? He goes, no one uses that word except me. And I was like, no, I use it. So I thought, I have to stand out. So I went home. I got online. I made this logo, and it said Mojo Makers. And so I created like all this paraphernalia for him, cups and, all this. And I sent it to him, and he's like, who is this lady? And so, I think on the basis of just taking a chance and expressing something that was, really just demonstrating, I really want to do this. I think I was able to, kind of push the door in a little more, because
that's smart. That's a good idea after an interview. I have to say that, I'm very happy, because already, in this panel, we get 2 nuggets. One, was from Christy, which is be good at what you do, right? That's the most important thing, you know, before your identity, the most important thing is be good at what you do. And what you said, Denise, is you have to network and you have to stand out, right? Be yourself and stand out. So now, you know, we are going to see if that's the reality of the board experience, because we are going to turn to Matt. And Matt is basically a professional board member now. And he is the one that has the longest tenure on corporate boards. And Matt is actually on a number of boards, and is considered an expert in governance. And so, Matt, can you tell us a little bit what was your board journey? First of all, how did it come up in your career that you were like, oh, I want to be on a board? And then also, you know, how did you get on your first board? And then do you believe that what Christy and Denise say, which is be good at what you do and network, is the key to get on a board? And then, of course, I would love to hear a little bit about how, as a gay man, you know, what was so specific in your board journey about being LGBT?
Yeah, thanks, Fabrice. And I would absolutely endorse a couple of the themes that you just called out. You know, in my case, I have the experience of having been a serial chief financial officer in a number of companies, and you know that kind of sets up a lane for particular roles in boards around audit committee and corporate finance and fundraising. It's obviously necessary in one of the smaller biotech companies I work with. And to pick up on the point that Christy made, you know, that is clearly the first item on the list for my first board role, and often when I get calls today or when I'm networking, because there's specific functional expertise that I bring. And just pausing for a moment on that, I think Christy's point is a really important one, that for folks on this call who might be considering a first board role, really anchoring on your own professional experience. And you know, frankly, if the work you have done so far doesn't necessarily line up with one of those capabilities that boards might need, general management, finance, law, HR leadership, certainly regulatory or development experience in the life sciences like we are here, you might think about how do you migrate that next career step for you to get there. Because although I think the aperture for who qualifies as a board member is widening, it's still going to encompass some of those specific skill sets. And then second to the point that I thought Denise made brilliantly, network. I think at this point, every board on which I serve came through a personal relationship that I've developed over time. And if I think about, you're going to generalize that experience, it may be useful, again, for folks on the call who are interested in board service to tune or overtune your networking to individuals who might be in the boardroom at the time that board searches come up. So that certainly means sit down, look at your relationships and your contacts and say, who is a CEO? Who sits on a board that I know and who knows my work? Or who else might be there? Who's in that room? The general counsel's in that room, members of the executive team in that room. For earlier stage companies, that might be venture capital investors. It might be law firm partners. It might be management consultants. It might be audit firm partners. And to the degree that you're interested in kind of supercharging your own searches, I think overtuning your networking to that set of individuals who might be there when the board says, hey, we have a director who's retiring, or we're looking to go public and we need to bring on some independent directors. And those might be particularly fruitful conversations to inspire.
But so Matt, you know, one of the things which is fascinating about you is that you are actually on a lot of private boards, right? And so, you know, very often when I talk to people that are kind of new in this, right, they have never considered board service, but now they realize that actually the regulator is saying that there is room for, you know, the abysmal representation of LGBTQ plus people to be dealt with. They realize there might be an opportunity to raise their hand. But, you know, yesterday I had an email from someone that was like, oh yeah, well, I would be very interested to be on the board of Pepsi or Coca, you know, meaning that or Coke, right? A lot of people think immediately, I want to be on the board of Target. But that's not where most of the board seats are. So can you explain to us a little bit what is the difference between private board, public boards? You know, do you start in a private board in order to get on a public board? You know, what is the deal here?
I think that's a really good observation, Fabrice. You know, we all tend to kind of shorthand to the Fortune 500 or the largest publicly traded companies, and those are certainly prestigious and well-compensated board roles, but they're also highly competed. And there's a finite and not terribly large number of seats on those boards. You know, the average board size of a public company in the US is probably 8 or 9 members. And if you consider that there are 2,500 companies in the Russell 3000 who are not in the Fortune 500, it gives you a sense for, even among public companies, all those boards. And so I think stepping back, and you know, maybe it's useful to think about public versus private, as you pointed out. There are in fact more privately held companies here in the US at least than there are publicly traded companies. And in fact, the absolute number of publicly traded companies has been shrinking over time for reasons that are beyond the scope of today's conversation. And there are also a lot of other governing bodies that are terrific on-ramps to build governing board experience and to gain visibility. You know, Christy talked about nonprofit board service. There are many opportunities there. I'd also encourage for folks on this call, right? I think this audience may be somewhat overtuned for larger companies that tend to have more established LGBT employee resource groups. Almost certainly, if you're in a company in the Fortune 500 or even the Russell 3000, your own company has subsidiaries and joint ventures and other kinds of bodies, of legal entities that have their own governing bodies. And that can be a terrific on-ramp, both for your own resume as well as for your networking, to say, I serve on the board of our UK subsidiary, or I serve on the board of our joint venture with another company, which gives you that governing board experience for your resume and for your own learning, obviously, and probably puts you in touch with a bunch of people who you may not see in the course of your day-to-day work. So I'd really encourage folks here to think about, short of PepsiCo and Coke, what are the other kinds of governing bodies or smaller companies, maybe even in your supply chain? Who do you buy things from? Who do you sell things to? And are those companies that might value your expertise?
Thank you, Matt. And I think that's an important point, right? Is that, you know, publicly listed company, you know, that's not where you want to look at first when you're thinking about board service. And then Denise, I cannot thank you enough. I see you're taking care of the chat too. You're amazing. You're basically both a panelist and a moderator. I love it. But Matt, you know, going back to one of the things that Denise said, which is giving back. You know, Denise put the accent on, you know, giving back, but also pulling others. You know, you have been very engaged on, you know, using your expertise to put a spotlight on the lack of representation of LGBTQ plus people in the boardroom. You also have been providing advice to a lot of aspiring board members. What is your motivation? You know, why are you doing that? Why are you not just focusing on your board and you know, and why are you so engaged in the board conversation?
I think consistent with some of the observations that Denise made in her comments, it does none of us any good to climb the ladder and pull it up behind us. And so I think it's been both tremendously important and tremendously fulfilling to have a chance to be a sponsor and a mentor to folks who are earlier in their, particularly in their corporate board journeys. And frankly, it's a lot of fun to meet people, in my case, especially across different industries, because I am way overtuned in life sciences conversations most of my day. And so, you know, for example, I had the chance a couple of years ago at the Executive Forum for Out and Equal to moderate a session of aspiring board members from a whole range of different industries. And just tremendously interesting to stay in touch with those folks over the course of the last couple of years and to see some of them now begin to land some board roles. You know, particularly in an era where lots of us are working in our home offices and Zoom is our means of communication, it's actually much easier to have those conversations outside your own department and even outside your own company.
Yeah, you don't have to drive to the coffee shop. And you know, the other thing that I love in your point, Matt, is that we have seen actually Many LGBTQ plus people land board seats lately, which is positive. Some very prominent, like Beth Ford, just landed a board seat at BlackRock. Beth Brooke is now on the board of the New York Times. Patrick Chong is on the board of 23andMe. Jim Fitterling is just joined a new board. Sander from Accenture, that I'm sure Christy knows, is on the board of ACOM. So we actually, even among the most prominent board seats, we have seen progress. So Christy, now I'll turn to you, and I would say after the board journey, meaning after you land your board seat, what happens? And one of the questions that Denise was dealing with in the chat while I was discussing with Matt was the fact that sometimes if you're a woman, if you are a representative of a minority, it's difficult to get your voice heard. But also if you bring a new perspective, you might actually alienate people that have been doing things a certain way. Did you ever get that feeling of, well, now that I am in here, I'd better keep a low profile? And also, do you feel that, being a woman and being a lesbian, do you feel that sometimes it's more difficult to get your voice heard? And what would you recommend to people that get their first board? What should they do on their first board to ensure that they get the best out of their seat?
Yeah, so Fabrice, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, so I've been fighting to have a voice since I was born. So I don't have a problem. And again, I know that that's something that is not everybody's experience. So I have no problem coming into a boardroom. The expectation is that you have a voice. Now, the expectation also is that you do your homework. I mean, I think what's really important for people to know is that seeking a board seat requires a lot of work. It is different than seeking a job, right? There is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done to not only know a company, to know their financials, to know every aspect, to listen to the investor calls, to do all the things you might not have to have done in your prior job. You really need to know the totality of the company, and you need to be prepared to talk about that and have an opinion on it, right? That's number one. Number two, I think the development of even a board bio, completely different than a resume. And you really have to think about, how am I going to present myself in a fundamentally different way, where I'm talking about my experiences, but I'm talking about them differently and how they would be accretive around the board table. And then I think when you are preparing for your board meetings, I know for my board, it's well over 200 hours a year that I am actually in board meetings with my board. And then on top of that, it's a half a day, sometimes a day of preparation for my board meetings to make sure that I've gone through every piece of the agenda that we've gone through, and that I'm taking notes on that I've got questions on that, and that it's my obligation in my swim lane, right, to raise those questions, or to be, in other words, insatiably curious around the table, right? That is, and I think that boards look for people who do that homework, who know what their role is and why they're there, and not try to be something that they're not, and who are collaborative, right? And who respectfully will be asking questions to really dig into the what's going on here, and to our responsibility for management and for stakeholders, right? To kind of see around corners. And so I think that I think that it's often not talked about, the amount of preparation to even get a board seat and to be on a board. It is a ton of work. I also think that I would encourage people, I like Matt and Denise, love people. I'm just curious about people. So meeting people and, networking, all that kind of stuff is just, I love it. The way to network though is different, when you're thinking about a board. And so I think you have to get to know people. But I think that you also have to be able to demonstrate knowledge about those boards that those people are, sitting on, so that you can demonstrate to them not only that you're a great person, but that you do your homework, right? So I would say that being in the boardroom is not a cakewalk. It is a ton of work.
Well, I love that you make that comment, Christy, because I do call Matt, from time to time. And Matt is always like, oh, I'm really busy because, I have a board coming up. And I always joke and I'm like, well, I thought that the point of being on a board is that you just get paid and you show up for 2 hours and listen to the strategy of the CEO. And that's it. You get your check and you're done. But you're right. It's actually a lot of preparation work before the board meeting. And then, one thing that I would love for you to talk about, Christy, is also the fact that it comes with an important fiduciary responsibility, right? And that if the company does anything that jeopardizes the well-being of the employees, or it does anything that is, scandalous, that you basically, your name is on the line too. So could you explain a little bit, how you deal with that responsibility and why it's actually an important responsibility to be on the board of a company?
Well, I think we again remember what your position is on the board. It is to protect stakeholders and to govern management, right? Not tell them what to do, but to govern the structure so that you are in some ways a risk layer, and managing that risk for the company and for the shareholder. I think that, it's interesting. The preparation for being on a board is so important because you have to know what's under the covers. What are the potential risks for this company? What are they going through? I joined a company board eyes wide open, knowing that they were going to be in legal issues with regards to opioids. I knew that going in, right? I wanted to be a part of the solution there. And I wanted the experience of being in that boardroom because I thought I brought something uniquely there with my leadership and strategy and people background, right? So I think that we've got to, and because of that, I had to ask some really difficult questions to sitting board members, right? Regarding what's the risk to me. I mean, all directors have director insurance or should have director insurance so that we are personally protected should something really go awry. And so learning about that was something I didn't know existed before, right? So knowing about that, understanding what the risks are to you, I think is really important. Understanding the risks and potential risks of a company and what they're involved in, whether that is a life sciences company or an oil and gas company, or the amount of time board members spent through COVID, right? And the risks that presented, right? So I think that with that, part of this decision-making process, this is, many people think, oh, I was a great executive, I'll make a great board member. That's just not the facts, right? Because it is a whole different ball game in terms of when you're an executive, you can steer the ship, you can tell people what to do, you can manage the business the way you want to manage it, and hopefully responsibly. In the boardroom, you can't tell people what to do. You can advise, you've got to assess risk, and you've got to protect shareholders, right? And so all of those things come with trade-offs personally, given the landscape of what a company is up against. So knowing those things and examining those things, I think is important.
Well, I love that. Christy, one of the things that you kind of refer to, as an example, when you talk about board insurance, board member insurance, right? It is basically that there is some knowledge associated with being on a board, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you, given the fact that you have this previous experience in the nonprofit sector too, I mean, that is also ongoing, do you really believe that being on a nonprofit board is a bit of a learning opportunity to be on a corporate board, or it's completely different? And also, is there a bridge between being on a nonprofit board and being on a corporate board?
I think that there is great learning about being on a nonprofit board. It certainly depends on what nonprofit board you sit on, right? I mean, there's great variation there. Do I think that board experience translates into a corporate board? I do, in terms of relationship, in terms of partnering, in terms of knowing what's going on with that nonprofit board and its financials, its strategy, its leadership. I think all of those things translate. I think it translates to a certain extent with management. I see much more board interaction with management at a nonprofit level than I see would be appropriate at in the private sector, right? And for-profit. So I think that there are some similarities, but I want to be really clear that even when I went through the board process, my nonprofit board experience, I don't want to say it didn't matter, but it wasn't highly valued. Okay. As she understands what goes on in the boardroom. Yeah. So I think that it's important, because I think from a social aspect, from a leadership aspect, from a homework aspect, all of those things are really good. But I think it's a different level when you go into a private company or a corporate board.
Yeah, and actually in the chat, Jason is making a very good point, which is very often in the United States, board members on nonprofit are kind of, more than giving advice on the strategy or on the compensation, they are really expected to raise money, which of course is not very relevant.
That's true.
To that. So actually, Matt, one thing that you can do if you want to think about board services, you can actually take an accreditation, or you can take a class at Stanford. So what are the things? How much do they cost? Are they useful? Someone in the chat was talking about getting the NACD accreditation. We actually now have a partnership with them. We get a discount. So ask us if you want the discount. So Matt, is that useful, or is that just a little sticker that doesn't really matter when you're looking for a board seat?
I think I'll respond in two components. One, there is absolutely a set of knowledge about being a board member, fiduciary responsibility, governance, legal requirements. And if you're an individual contemplating board service and you haven't otherwise got that stuff in your day job, meaning you're not a general counsel or you haven't been actively involved with boards, I think there's a tremendous amount that can be learned through that process that will make you a better director. And how you get that can range from spend some time with Wikipedia through less formal, free or inexpensive programs on through NACD certification, or even residential programs that some law schools and business schools offer. Similarly, there are organizations, Women in Bio is one in our life sciences industry, that specifically run boardroom ready programs over the course of a year for aspiring directors. So absolutely, there is a ton of content knowledge that would be valuable. However, I would agree with the observation Christy made about nonprofit board service. I think that is of limited value in your candidacy for a board. I think that if you were otherwise a qualified candidate or otherwise been identified as part of a board search, having an NACD certification or having demonstrated going through a professional school program, probably helpful at the margin, maybe mostly in the signaling value of demonstrating your seriousness about this part of your journey. But it is certainly not a necessary or sufficient condition to get a board role.
And I have a question for you, is that usually those trainings at Stanford or the NACD, do they take everybody that wants to take it, or do they select people that can take the accreditation or the training?
I think the programs vary, and some do require essentially a qualification process. Perhaps those are some of the programs that might be of most value in getting that seal of approval, if you would.
Well, great. And, Matt, Americans never talk about money, but I'm French, so I'm not binded by that rule. And Christy just told us that it's actually a lot of work to be on a board, beyond the board meeting itself. There's a preparation. So does it pay? And is it a competitive compensation you get?
So the advice I always give on this question for aspiring board candidates is to think about a board role as additive potentially to your day job, but unlikely to be life-changing in a good way. Always having the potential to be life-changing in a bad way if you wind up in a board where there is a scandal or you are in years of litigation. So I think it's prudent for candidates to be thoughtful about that. Maybe in a bit more detail, the kind of compensation that you get as a board member will, to some degree, vary based on the kind of company with which you engage. Earlier stage, venture-funded, smaller companies, you may primarily get compensation in the form of stock options, which can be terrific if the company does well and utterly worthless if the company does not. For larger, publicly traded, more mature companies, generally compensation will be a mix of cash compensation and equity in the form, let's say, of an annual or multi-year equity grant. And maybe that helps you put some money aside in the college fund for your children, or think about a down payment on a second home. But if make money being a board member is your primary motivation, you might want to rethink it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you say it can be life-changing in a bad way. I imagine, if you're on the board of Enron, it can be unpleasant. Is it true, Matt, that you always keep a little luggage under your bed in case the FBI takes you in the middle of the night?
I may or may not be packed, but an anecdote that I've recounted, and I recall thinking this at the time that the Enron scandal blew up, that those board members just had a paragraph of their obituaries get written. And in the case of a corporate blow up like an Enron, or here in California, we have the Theranos trial of the Theranos founder underway right now. That could be a decade of work after the bad thing happens for
people
board
Google
members
your
of those
name
companies.
People Google your name and it's not pretty. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, it
so
just more positively, it reinforces the seriousness of the governing role that Christy was describing.
Yeah, very good point. So Denise, now Christy is telling us it's a bunch of work. You have to prepare. Matt is telling us, you're not going to be able to go on vacation to Turks and Caicos with the amount of money you make. Although, if you're on the board of Amazon, it's probably $1 million. But, unfortunately, as Matt mentioned, there's only a few seats on the board of Amazon. But so Denise, you retired, you had a wonderful career. You mentioned that you actually have children. I saw a gorgeous dog behind you. Why didn't you just buy a house in Cape Cod like everybody else and led the good life? Is there something exciting about being on a board? What do you love about it?
You know what? I have to say, I do love it. And I agree with Christy. It's a lot of work, and, it can be very financially rewarding too. I want to say that maybe every board isn't, but can it be financially rewarding? Sure. Is it worth your time? It absolutely can. But for me, what I love about it is that, first, I love this connection with these super talented people at the board level. And then I have a lot of interaction with employees, and I love that. And someone asked the question, like, what kind of impact can you have? Well, you're a board member, you're talking a lot about culture and people and trust and belonging and, deals and a bunch of other things. And so the learning is phenomenal. I am learning so much And I think that's what life is about, as we go on, if we're not learning, we're going to, shrivel up, so, at this point in life, I'm still trying to soak in as much as possible. And I don't know, some of the boards I sit in, there's a Nobel Prize winner, there's, this person here, a person that runs a college, a first, like, where would I have the chance to, in one meeting, like, meet all these really neat people who are at a place, for many of them in their career, where, what they have to prove is that they don't. And so that's the beautiful thing. It's this time to give back. And what I don't see, at least at the boards I'm on, people aren't fighting for airtime. They're not trying to, hey, this is what I think, and this is what you should do. Effective board members, are thoughtful about their comments and their questions, and, definitely a desire to help the organization be successful, to do right by the stakeholders, but also to help the other board members, like, bring their best. And that's, I think I'm super fortunate in the companies that, I really have the pleasure to work with, but that's why I do it. Is it a lot of work? Yes, because what you don't think about is, when you're on a board, you're on committees. So you might be on a compensation committee or audit committee, or, an R&D committee. And the board committees can be a lot. And, if you, are thinking about this as a career, you may also want to be a chair of one of those committees. So when you take on, a chair role of committee, it's even more work and more responsibility. So yes, is it a time demand? Absolutely. You can't really skate through, otherwise, your questions are hollow. And I think most people would know that you didn't do the work or didn't care enough. Yeah. So I don't know, that's why I do it. I'm having a ton of fun right now. And I think of it as not even something in retirement. I think of it as a career. This is my career. And to take it seriously, people asked about, like, taking a course at an NACD, doing something like that. And I think, hell yeah, if this is your career, build the skills, because nobody walks into, board service and has it all down. There's legal, there's regulatory, there's a lot of things that aren't just intuitive that, for me, I can't learn fast enough. The rate at which I think I need to learn, I can't keep up with it. So.
Well, thank you so much. I think that unfortunately we are at time. I didn't manage the time super well. I have to say that, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful that you took the time to join us, because, I think Denise is on 5 boards. Christy has a career at Accenture. She's on a non-profit board. She's on a for-profit board. Matt is probably on 70 life science boards. So I'm incredibly grateful you took the time to join us. I have to say that I cannot take any credit for the moderation, because Matt had already written a guide. So basically the questions were prepared by Matt. So thank you so much, Matt. And maybe as a word of conclusion, I would say that what I heard from Christy is that, first, of course, you have to be good in your career and try to make it to the top of your field. Second of all, what Denise is saying is network. And in fact, Matt says network in a very intentional manner, with a CEO on your LinkedIn, who is already on a board on your LinkedIn, and then maybe try to add the title chief, in your business title. And then what Denise said is love people. Instead of looking at networking as a thing that you have to do, look at it as a way of discovering other people's experience. Maybe also look at it as a way of being helpful to people, and then they might become helpful to you. And one of the things that I loved about what you said, Denise, is do not forget your mentors. Write them a Christmas card, keep in touch with them, because, they are the ones that brought you there. And then, what Christy and Matt also reminded is that you might not become rich, but it's actually a career in itself, and it's a fascinating environment to be in, and it's actually a source of joy. And so I think that's really important. And I want to thank everybody that joined this session. It was actually very well attended. Denise, kind of stepped up and moderated the chat, which was a huge help. And you know, I think what Matt and Denise and Christy said is that if you need advice on how to position yourself today for a board seat, maybe in 10 years from now, you know, they are available. You know, we have a database of candidates at Quorum that we make available to recruiters, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. And you know, remember that it might be a very good time for LGBTQ board representation because the board is paying attention, the regulator is paying attention, and in fact, investors are paying attention. On this note, I think, you know, it's the end of my, if I'm not crazy, 5:30.
You did a great job, Fabrice. So we have to say that to you. Terrific job.
Well, I have to say, I don't know why I said Matt was going to do the moderation. So. But I'm happy you had a good time. I had a great time. I loved spending time with you. And I think, you know, it's such an interesting conversation because very often the people at Out on Equal think about representation in senior management, but they never really think about what's happening in the boardroom. And so I'm really happy we could put it on the radar screen of Out on Equal tonight. And I talk to you very soon.
A pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Right.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Denise. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Matt. I see you soon. Ciao.